I asked the top scientists on this several times, do we really have to get down to near zero? Can't we just, cut it in half or a quarter? And the answer is that until we get near to zero, the temperature will continue to rise. This equation has four factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to zero. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to zero. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to zero. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
In fact, following the United Nations Copenhagen Conference in December of 2009, the Washington Post ran the headline, "Copenhagen Climate Deal Shows New World Order May Be Led by U.S., China." The Copenhagen Conference was disguised as a summit that would save the planet from man-made global warming by cutting carbon emissions. When taking a look at the almost 200-page document that was being proposed, it becomes evident that this was yet another attempt to establish global government and set up a global tax. In Section 38, it states, "The scheme for the new institutional arrangement under the Convention will be based on three basic pillars: government, facilitative mechanism, and financial mechanism." In Section 47, subsection F, it discusses cap-and-trade schemes and carbon taxes and the use of new and existing flexible carbon market mechanisms. These cap-and-trade schemes were just that, a scheme to further transfer the wealth from the poor to the ultra-rich.
One of the ways it will drive the change is through global governance and global agreements.
The fact that our president even attended should be considered treason. Just weeks before the conference, ClimateGate hit the media. Secret emails confirm that many of the United Nations lead scientists had engaged in fraud in order to promote the idea that man-made global warming was occurring and that carbon dioxide was a toxic gas. In reality, they admitted the Earth had been cooling for the last decade and that they had destroyed the source data in order to ensure the scientific community would be unable to review their findings. Bill Jones was forced to resign from his position at East Anglia University, and Penn State has launched an investigation into Michael Mann. Because of the scandal, many countries refused to sign the agreement, and instead only 25 heads of state, including rock star President and Savior Barack Obama, signed a much shorter and broader accord. The document states that a high-level panel will be created, and that parties will be subject to domestic auditing, supervision, and assessment.
The climate conference in Copenhagen is another step towards the global management of our planet.
The idea that carbon dioxide, the life force for plants here on Earth, is a toxic gas and should be taxed is laughable. There have been numerous periods of time in which the Earth has had vastly more carbon in the atmosphere than present day. In areas where there have been volcanic eruptions which emit large amounts of CO2, plants have benefited, and there is no negative impact on the surrounding environment, as well as indigenous people, from the excess carbon dioxide. The globalists promote this theory to keep mankind in fear, not only for the establishment of a global government and a global carbon tax, but the literal control of the entire planet. An even darker side to the scam of man-made global warming exists. In reality, it's about population control.
You see, there are two kinds of law. This is a subject I love. I've been talking about this for years. There are two kinds of law on the earth that rule the whole world, but most people don't know that. All over the world, all governments are ruled by what is called civil law. But there is a second law which also operates all over the earth identical. It's called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. That is the law of God in the world of business. I don't care if you're in Japan, in Africa, in China, in Istanbul, Turkey. If you have a company, if you have a corporation, if you are doing business where you buy and sell and make money, you are operating on this earth under something called UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Uniform Commercial Code. Uniform Commercial Code is based directly on Vatican canon law, on the Roman canon law.
Free enterprise is our economic system or our means of production, privately owned and operated for personal benefit. Free enterprise cannot legally be taxed unless it volunteers itself. The reason why income tax seems inescapable is because most every job on the planet requires you to sign a number of documents with fancy wording stating that you are agreeing to be a representative of a corporation or entity. What all this means is simply that when you sign working papers, which are required by pretty much every employer that you apply to, you are waiving your rights as a natural person protected under the Constitution and agreeing to represent an artificial person that is not protected under the Constitution. It's difficult to avoid because if you do not sign the document waiving your rights, you won't get the job. So why does every employer voluntarily pay taxes, which leads to the requirement of those documents? Because without doing so, the business loses all state and federal benefits provided to private or commercial business. And furthermore, most people simply accept the mistruth that income tax is required by law without investigating it. When your name is presented on a document with the first letter of your first and last name capitalized, it represents capitis diminutia minima. Which occurs when a man's family relations alone were changed. It's a minimal loss of rights. When your last name appears in capital letters, it represents capitis diminutia media, which occurs when a man loses his rights of citizenship but not his rights to liberty. This means you can be fined and penalized but not enslaved or imprisoned. But when your entire name is capitalized on any document, it represents capitis diminutia maxima, which states that a man's condition changes from freedom to bondage. All rights of citizenship and family rights are surrendered. This means you can be fined, imprisoned, and enslaved in any amount for any duration at the whim of the state's suggestion. But it is important to note that if you do not legally bind yourself to these documents stating that you waive your rights and represent a corporation, you do not have to attend any court.
He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins.